2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's get it started. Let's get it started. Let's get it started. Getting a little vulgar to start with. Good luck. Your Bill. Welcome back to Build Theory. I'm Aurian Archive. And today, we're going to walk through my Warshade build. So first of all, let's go find something to fight. Real quick. Let's do Task Force. And we'll head for Imperious Strike Force. Now, this is not the first time that I've actually shown my Warshade in action. Somewhere in the various streams is an abandoned sewer trial that I went on where I just kicked into streaming mid-trial. One of the other players had a Warshade, and it was a very clear difference between their Warshade and, well, my Warshade, what I refer to as the Disexistence build. And we're actually just going to go ahead and kick up a task force here. And create a form of task force, accept current challenge settings, and we're kicking off. We'll ramp it up a bit. We'll do +2. And let's get going. Alright, first thing we want to look up here are my resistances. They are presently capped. We'll bring up powers, sorry, not incarnate attributes, and look at damage resistance, find power sources. Okay, and actually no, psionic resistance isn't currently capped because I didn't have enough enemies around me. Let's fuel up. Boom. Unchain Essence. Boom. 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 Let's get a pet in here. We are down and up. Alright, everybody, enjoy some stun. We are no longer kept to resistances, though. So let's back off and gain some distance. Okay, Clarion's up. Eclipse is almost back up. Come on, Eclipse. Alright, just let enough of them get in. Eclipse up. Boost, boost. Boom. Down. We're still 1 minute out, and we got a healer over there. Whoa. 1 minute out. So got Return to Battle going. Okay, Unleash Potential. Kick back into hypercharge. Grab some damage. Target down, target down. Unchain. Pet. Boom. Boom up. Okay, gotta drop that healer. Second healer, gotta drop him. Okay, closing in. Come on, give me mobs. Eclipse up, eclipse up, eclipse up. Boost up. 10 seconds to boom. 10 seconds to boom. Clarion up, Clarion go. Boom up. Targets down, no pets. Focus on weakest boss. Recharge off dead enemies. Boom. Alright, recharge, recharge. Full house, full house. Incarnate out. Hasten up, hasten up. Healers. Healers down. One more. Healer down. Eclipse up. Eclipse recharge. Recharge. Boom. Boom out. Recharge. Target closest. Target down. Focus on boss. Boss down. One more. Room clear. Alright. So, here we go. +2, X8, Warshade, and Cimarera. These guys carry heavy debuffs, heavy buffs to themselves. As you notice, I did get stomped twice. Used, what is this? Stick and return to come back once. Used return to battle to come back the second time. And, truth be told, could have unpacked a few more tricks in there. Presently, I'm running Shadow Step. And that's because Shadow Step is, I believe, inherent. Checking. Let's do the powers. What's our info say on Shadow Step? Info, detailed info. Description. Okay, there's no level at, so Shadow Step is inherent. The combat teleport version, Starless Step, is not inherent. You do have to make a power selection to take it. And I really could have taken Starless Step instead of Shadow Recall. And I mostly took Shadow Recall to make this build more effective in teaming circumstances. So, what exactly are we looking at, and why do I hate Warshades? Well, we'll kind of start with, if I can bring this up, to give you an idea of how many powers in the Warshade set either don't actually do anything or aren't very useful at all. And there's a number of them. Shadow Blast is just a weak tier 1 attack, which you would normally skip on most builds, on most normal builds, to get around slotting limitations. Gravimetric Snare which is a moderate DOT with a Mobilize. Dark Nova, which is a shapeshift special. Shadow Blast, which I obviously took. Starless Step, which I didn't take, as I already said, I chose to take Shadow Recall instead. Gravimetric Emanation, which is a ranged cone. This is like a T8, primary T8 on a blaster. It's a minus, it's a foe disorient, it's really late in the build, and it does no damage. The formula to calculate these powers is just broken. It's fundamentally wrecked. On the other side, you can see I didn't take Black Dwarf, which is another shape-shifting power. I didn't take Nebulous Jump, which is self-intangible plus jump. Basically, think of it as a super jump that makes the enemies unable to hit you. I mean, cute, but it's not really anything that has a tactical value. Melee PBOE, Foe Teleport, Shadow Slip, which is basically you teleport enemies to you. Actually, this is a really cool power. It's part of the teleport update. Didn't take it again because for this build, I deemed Shadow Recall more useful. And Inky Aspect, which is basically the oppressive gloom from Dark, where you disorient enemies around you, and it takes away from your hit points to do that. Now, actually, that was a pretty good power to have on live when you didn't have IOs, but now that we've got IOs, it's not really a good power. So, how is the build? What is the concept of the build? Well, the concept of the build is actually pretty simple. Get in the melee range, fight in the melee range, keep enemies in melee range, because the Warshade, the number of buffs and power that you get are all click PBAOEs. That is to say, they are point blank area of effect. Eclipse is around you. You can see the shuffle on the floor. Sunless Mire, around you. Stygian Circle, around you. Stygian Return, enemies that are around you. Unchained Essence, enemies that are dead, around you. The range on the actual effective range on Unchained Essence, let's just look and see what it is. It's only 40 feet, which isn't that far when most blast powers are like 60 feet to 80 feet. So it's a really close target range. So given that you have a number of powers, and on top of that, your strongest attack, Quasar, is a PBAOE. So your biggest buffs and your strongest attack are PBAOE. You need enemies close. But let's actually bring up and look at the build, and we'll rack it off. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's one more, I think. Maybe. Alright. Maybe not. Maybe not in this build. But let's go down it through the Power Blast. Shadow Bolt doesn't do knockback. Ebon Eye doesn't do knockback. Immobilize, Shapeshift. Alright, Shadow Blast, knockback. Dark Detonation, knockback. Gravimetric Emanation, knockback. Unchained Essence, knockback. Quasar, knockback. You might notice a trend here. There's a lot of powers that do knockback, and not just any tiny amount of knockback. The base knockback on, let's see, where's Quasar? The base knockback is 18.69 magnitude knock. The Unchained Essence is 1.87 magnitude knock. Dark Detonation is 3.74 magnitude knock. Shadow Blast is 8.7 magnitude knock. These are massive amounts of knock, and effectively, instead of knocking the enemy down, they knock the enemy away from you. So effectively, the Warshade knocks all of its enemies outside of its click range. Yeah, that's fundamentally broken. It's not just counterintuitive, it's fundamentally broken. The powers don't work together. And that's part of the problems with building a Warshade, in that the powers do not work together. So in order to craft a build, you either have to settle for something where you're chasing enemies down. Okay, a lot of your attacks are ranged, so a number of players say, well, you're just ranged. Well, here's the problem with that. What happens if you're playing with a team who doesn't have ranged powers and you're knocking everything away from them? It doesn't really work. That's how you take other players off. So now so you have multiple goals then with Warshades. The first thing is you want to mitigate the knockback. The more enemies you can keep closer to you, the more buffs you can take advantage of, the more powers you can take advantage of. The more you knock enemies away, the less powers you can take advantage of. It's very counterintuitive, and prior to sudden acceleration, there was no way to build a Warshade that could keep enemies close. You either had to just go all technical powers, basically things like the intangible jump, but you have to drop all your attack powers because you just knock everything away. So it was a very the Warshade is the poster child for why knockback sucks, or at least the implementation of knockback sucks. Alright, so Warshades broken from the start, and here's one of the things that a lot of people honestly don't understand. It's not a joke. Epic archetypes only existed, per both Cryptic and Paragon, to implement power sets or ideas that could not be implemented in normal archetypes. Cryptic had the idea for a shape-shifting power set, but since they couldn't implement shape-shifting into the normal power sets, they implemented shape-shifting as part of the epic archetypes. But these weren't epic archetypes. These were tertiary archetypes. Toys. That's pretty much as blunt as I can put it. Because they were toys, there's a lot of things in Warshades that are broken on a system level. To put it this way, during the life of the Secret Server, one of the power developers stated outright, it would be easier to create an entirely new archetype from scratch and re-implement all of the existing powers on the Keldians, the Peacebringers, and the Warshades. It would be easier just to remake them from the ground up, entirely new code, not use any of the existing AT information, than it would be to fix the archetypes. That's how special case scenario they are. I mean, we're looking at something that makes KDE 3.x black boxes look sane. Alright, so kind of keeping in mind how that is, how did I approach it? And my approach is, well, I went for melee defense. It's at 47.24%. Effectively speaking, I am melee soft cap. And this lets me get in very close to enemies. Now, to be fair, I did get to melee soft cap with agility radial paragon. I did need that to gain a few extra percentage points. If I go ahead and just remove from or clear power from slots. And okay. Actually, this was the most recent revision. I think I'm like on R8. What am I on? Which one am I on? Okay, I am on Force of Will. Alright, so here's the build in Mid-Sierra Reborn. To give you a better idea of what we're looking at. And we'll go ahead and swap over to totals so you can see the totals. And here we can see 47.2. And we'll just click off Agility Radial. According to Mid-Sierra Reborn, I should be falling in at 45.6. And we actually are falling in at 45.60 now that something has ticked off. Down from, what was it, 46? And you can also see that at some point I have been trying Cardiac Core to control the endurance consumption and improve the resist. But once you get to a certain point, improving resist is kind of pointless. Alright, so The goal of the build is melee defense. Second goal of the build is to melee defense getting close. Second, mitigate the knockback. Be able to put myself into a position where I can use all of my powers to their full effect without running out of powers or without interfering with the build, without interfering with the character's ability to use their powers. So, lots of knockback mitigation made possible by sudden acceleration, high recharge to drive getting those powers back up as soon as possible. But the third goal is Perma Eclipse. Now, if you're not familiar with Eclipse, first of all, this power gives you, it takes away foes' endurance and drains foes' recovery. Okay, this is actually good if you're working with an Electric Blast, a Kinetics, or someone else who can also affect endurance recovery. Now, in one of the recent changes, endurance recovery actually now means something when fighting against enemies, so this is a potentially stronger approach to debuffing enemies is to remove their endurance. Crucially, though, Eclipse also gives you a return on endurance, and it increases your resistance to all damage. This means that Warshades with Eclipse are one of the few sets, if not only sets, that can cap all of their resistances. And if we click on, right now, I'm on Eclipse, and if we go over to info, I've locked it off, you can see I only have one target. So we'll drop back into the game, and we'll go pick on, first of all, we combat attributes back up, and we'll go damage resistance, and there's a minion, and let's see if we can pull him close. One minion in range, it clips up, and okay, we're actually with a single minion, only capped to fire and cold. Smashing lethal isn't quite there. Energy and negative energy aren't quite there. Sonic's not even close, and Toxic's not even close. My cat has decided to join us. You gonna meow into the microphone? You just upset that I'm not talking to you. Okay, so we gotta wait 40 seconds for Eclipse to come back up. But once you get the Perma Eclipse, you can basically be plowing through endurance, and as long as Eclipse comes back up, and there's another thing, I think they despawned. Oh well. So let's get into the mix. Let's go find a large group of enemies. 10 seconds out. There's a surgeon. Let's get ready to go. Okay, we're at full mob saturation. Eclipse up. And there, we are hard capped to everything. Alright, boom out. Recharge, recharge, recharge. Recharge up. Let's get over and get our defense numbers up. And as you can see, the Cimararans have effectively cratered all my defense. All I have left now is just resistance and the heal I can regenerate off of the dead bodies. Okay, there we go. Defense is coming back, but without Ageless, it's not really going to be enough. Okay. Alright. Oh, this is going to be close. Okay, we made it. Alright, recharge, 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 recharge. Come on, get close. Oh, one was close enough. Come on, shields up, shields up, shields up. And this is also why I picked the Cimarron, because they can just bury your defense pretty much without even trying. So it basically becomes worst case scenario. Okay. So we're going to park here for a second. All right, so defense, useful for getting into enemies, but also problematic. As you can see, I'm just plowing through enemies, but still managed to make it out of that with only one death and no alpha slot. So I'm okay with that. All right, so moving on. That's kind of the theories and the concepts behind how the build is intended, what the goals are. So now that we've gone through, we've shown it in action. And we'll get agility back up just for the endurance. Okay. I'm sorry, but I cannot allow you to live. Alright. So, let's go over the actual build itself. An Ebon-Eye, now basically I took Ebon-Eye because it is the strongest of the between tier 1 and tier 2 attacks. And it gets the full superior essence for that global heal. Absorption, which is auto self energy negative. Because it is an auto, it picks up the steadfast protection and gladiator's defense procs, gravity shield. Now, another note to make here is that this is intended to be a scaling build. So this is supposed to work up and down level ranges. And as you can see, I haven't actually gone through and finished plussing up some of the powers. Like, I haven't finished plussing up Endurance, Essence Drain, Dark Detonation, Shadow Blast. I should probably go ahead and just catalyze that while I'm thinking about it. So I still have additional damage, recharge, and capability that I could draw out of here. I also don't have anything in Mighty Leap, and I haven't slotted up Recon Resolve either, and I should probably go ahead and do a Catalyst and a Miracle. Also Hurdle, which is blank. So this is still, there is room to grow from where it's at. So going back to the build itself, because these are not plus, they are not plus because of Eclipse, and it is designed to be scaling. You get this performance up and down the level range as soon as the IOs take effect, which would be between 25 to 30. And I went with Mighty Leap mostly for takeoff, which, as you saw, when you get surrounded and your powers may be a little bit off from recharging, being able to have a knockdown that kicks enemies away, actually a really good thing to have on a Warshade. Now, I know that if I went with experimentation, I could pick up the combat teleport that way, and then I'd have both the Shadow Step, long, slow teleport, and the combat teleport, which is much quicker, but obviously I didn't do that. And the other reason is way down at the, well, we'll get to it eventually. So continuing on with the build, so went with Mighty Leap and Force of Will because it is one of the travel sets that a Warshade can take. Shadow Blast, first power that I need to mitigate some knockback on, picks up Apocalypse for the 5-slot recharge and Overwhelming Force. Now, this harkens back to one of the things that I've mentioned before. Overwhelming Force, because of the way that it works, it initiates its own knockback or knockdown component. Overwhelming Force doesn't actually mitigate some of these stronger knockbacks. From experience, I had Overwhelming Force on Quasar on a previous build. In fact, probably still have. That would be the R5 Final. Okay, yes, R5 Final. This was previous build before sudden acceleration, and here you can also see that I hit the melee soft cap, and with Eclipse, with only a single target, I was into calculated energy negative fire cold hard caps on resistance. But as you can see, just nothing else was really mitigated, and that affected some of my other power choices. It's like I was taking, what was it? Dark Detonation, was taking that. So you can kind of see that I'm down on some attacks, comparatively speaking. Alright, coming back up to R8, Force of Will. And on R8, Force of Will, so moving on from Shadow Blast, next up is Combat Jumping, which is basically there to help boost me up into melee soft cap. It's a cheap defensive power, pool power that anyone can pick up. Penumbral Shield, which gives me native resistances to fire, cold, toxic. And that's picked up with Unbreakable Guard for the melee defense. Same thing with Gravity Shield. 1 second. Sorry about that. So, Penumbral Shield picks up Unbreakable Guard. Sunless Mire, which is our PvOE self plus damage, self plus 2 hit. Basically, think of this as Soul Drain. Now, Soul Drain on a Warshade, if we lock it off, right click, go into info, and we look at, I'm currently capped at 10 on this, and our damage, where's our damage? Okay. Our damage buff is 110% damage to self with capped enemies and a 2-hit of 45%. So, significant 2-hit that lasts for 30 seconds. And at current rate, it's nearly perma. In fact, if I click it off and cut hasten in, it actually is very, very close to perma. So you can basically be in mob saturations, walking around with 45% 2-hit all the time. Won't quite be damage capped, because it's not really great as a damage boost. Let's lock off Dark Detonation for a second. Let's do Quasar. Quasar gives us 387, and if I turn Sunless Mire on, we're at 587. So we got a decent boost out of it, but you could get it. Sunless Mire is not as overwhelmingly powerful as Soul Drain can be on some other archetypes, aka Defenders. Alright, moving on. Dark Detonation, since we're going for recharge, picks up Ragnarok for that 10% recharge time and moves to Sudden Acceleration because we've already exhausted our Overwhelming Force and Shadow Blast. Twilight Shield, Unbreakable Guard, and this is where we pick up the proc because our resistances are energy negative. We already have auto energy negative resistance and absorption. So Gravity Shield and Penumbral Shield pick up more resistances comparatively because they are weaker, but Twilight Shield and Absorption gives you some stronger energy absorption. Maneuvers, some may say Maneuvers is underslotted, and yes, with Maneuvers clicked on, it is an endurance drain, and you are kind of held hostage to defeating enemies to get some endurance return. Shadow Cloak, again, you can already hear some people saying it's underslotted, but the defense value is pretty low, 3.75 base. Maneuvers is only 2.63 base. You can boost the defense all you like. Your defense isn't actually going anywhere. So, focusing on recharge and getting Stygian Circle, which is our self plus HP plus end. And as you can see, I've gone with Synapse's Shock, even though this power doesn't actually do any damage. I am hard capped on the endurance return, and I have a pretty decent recharge rate going on, and I've picked up 6.25% recharge time. Now, if I could free up a slot somehow, I would probably swap this over to Power Transfer, which has a plus heal and a 7.5% recharge. I just haven't figured out a good way to gain that extra slot. Orbiting Death picks up the Chaldean's Grace, which is Form Empowerment, which basically is additional resist for the human form. Essence Drain. Essence Drain picks up... well, this has no knockback. This is a plus self HP. It's basically picking up Hecatomb just for the recharge. Gravity Well, Melee, Hold. It picks up Blistering Cold to augment the hold capability. And that was this power here that I very rarely landed. Going back to the... And then we pick up Hasten just to get everything moving back around so much quicker. And then we have Quasar, which is our nuke, which runs Avalanche and runs Sudden Acceleration to mitigate the knockdown. And we're picking up Melee Defense, Dark Extraction. Okay, this is one of the things where Dark Extraction is actually a significant amount of your damage potential. You will notice a very vast difference if you're soloing between having 2 or 3 pets out versus having only 1 pet out. So the more you can get Dark Extraction up, basically the better. And theoretically, the pets will last for 200 seconds, and I've got a recharge on of about 63 seconds, so I can have 3 pets out roughly on average, which definitely helps damage potential. Now, if you're running with a full team, or you're running in a mob saturation environment, keeping 3 pets alive probably isn't happening. And then Eclipse picks up Unbreakable Guard, and this goes full on for the recharge with endurance recharge time, resistance, and resistance endurance recharge time. And it does that so we max our recharge time as best as possible. But even with agility up, we're still not quite into red cap. We're only into green cap on recharge. So if I had plus this would have gone from being a scaling build to a to a level 50 build. But when you look at the recharge time, you can see why I really didn't bother. Hasten presently is at 114 over 120 seconds. Now we'll turn off agility so we know what our delta looks like. Without agility, within power scaling, Hasten is at 1 to 1.3 out of 120 seconds. Now, for the most part, how you can basically judge how quick something will take to recharge is you can double the difference in time between the duration and the subtraction of the recharge time. So 1 to 1.3 minus 120 seconds, we have 1.3 seconds. We double that, we have 2.6 seconds. So on average, we can probably calculate roughly that Hasten will have a 2.6 second downtime. Well, what's Eclipse look like? Eclipse, again, this is with Agility Incarnate turned out, has an 86.01 second recharge time on a duration of 90 seconds, which is well within the margin that gives us 4 seconds over 2.6. So even if you miss, even if a hasten doesn't refresh right on time, you still have a few seconds to work with where you can keep Eclipse up. So if you stagger when you hit Eclipse and when you hit hasten, you can very reliably maintain a perma Eclipse. Or you can maintain close enough to perma Eclipse that it really doesn't matter. Alright, and so Weaken Resolve, basically I took this on the way towards Unleashed Potential. Unchain Essence, this is another one. It gives you a little bit more damage than you might think. Because the damage calculation, let's see if I can actually get them up here. The damage calculations are 189.24 average damage with 59.7 damage per activation. By comparison, Essence Drain, a melee attack, is 46 per activation, and Dark Detonation is 48.40. So Unchained Essence actually gives you better damage per activation than one of your primary targeted AoE powers. So it's actually kind of good for putting down some mass damage and also for giving you some breathing room by, well, stunning everything. And if picking up sudden acceleration, A, to mitigate the knockback, B, to give me that high recharge time, and C, because I do have that hit points and damage buff, which Warshades really need. And then Unleashed Potential, and Warshades really don't get a tier 9 getaway because they get Eclipse, and once you get Perma Eclipse, that's really it. So Unleashed Potential is basically here as another fallback, because there's not a whole lot of fallbacks for Warshades. Once something breaks through your defense, and once they start hacking away at your resist, you really don't have a whole lot of other utilities, because you really need dead enemies to get the most out of your return. Or get the... okay, Stygian Circle doesn't work on live enemies. Eclipse works on live enemies, but Stygian Circle doesn't. So you really need enemies dead, and Unleashed Potential is a great way to gain some extra. Let's go ahead and just look at it. We'll close these up. We'll look at base, and we're looking at current regeneration rate, which is 11.22 seconds, and we'll hit, and we're bumped up to 19.64. So with one power, I've basically doubled my regeneration rate. Now, if I double my regeneration rate, and I'm currently capped on resistances, I'm now into straight out tanker levels of regeneration. With capped resistances, I should be able to get clear, or at least defeat an enemy to give me time to do something else. So Unleashed Potential is basically there to give me time to operate. So that's the build. Now, we've already been over some of the big weaknesses. The big weakness being natively you have knockback that renders your key powers, your buffs, completely useless. Now, why don't I think much of the forms? Well, this is one where I did a human Nova form. And basically, I worked backwards to take the build and the slots and the set that I knew how, and that I knew worked, that I knew to give us a build that was into strong defenses, perma eclipse, and so on, giving us lots of power. And this is the Hue Nova form, and we're still into melee defense because we kept the slotting. With Eclipse up, we're still pushing hard caps. But here's one of the key problems with the way Chaldeans, Peacebringers, and Warshades were implemented. There is technology in the game now where slotting for one power can be used for multiple powers. It's a power redirection. And this is something that's seen in the quick snipes, the quick assassin strike. Is basically you have two sets of power, but the same slotting is applied to both powers at the system level. But that tech did not exist when Warshades and Peacebringers were created. So instead, the Shapeshift gained their own complete separate class of powers, which have completely separate slots. And this presents a problem because bonuses don't always necessarily go across. You don't get access to all the powers that you have in one build that you have in the other, and you have a much limited range of slotting. So what this means is when you hear somebody say, well, I made a Triform build. No, you didn't. You made a build that sucks. Put bluntly, there's no effective way to create a build that does all three forms, Nova, Dwarf, and Human, that gives you the ability to mitigate the counterintuitive, if not game-breaking, aspects of the Warshade. And that's a problem. And this is, again, going back to previous live stream where I just kicked the camera into gear on a sewer trial, and my Warshade didn't have a problem with the trials Richter, and the other Warshade bit the dust a couple times. And going up against Richter, they don't have the kind of debuffs that some Aurians have. Richter generally don't flatten your defense to the point where all your defense is in the red and you have no defense whatsoever, where you're just going to have to straight take every single punch they're throwing at you. So kind of keeping that in mind, that's why I really don't like Warshades. The concept was a good one, but until they are redone to use power redirection, where your existing powers, where your basic slotting is transferred into the form slotting, or if you go to Nova form, and now all of your ranged powers can be used in Nova form, but you lose the melee powers, but you keep the slotting on the ranged powers, you still keep your other set bonuses, that would actually make for a very compelling build. But that that archetype does not exist. So anyways, I don't have a lot of positive things to say about how the shapeshifting was implemented. You can make a very strong tank using the dwarf forms. They actually, because they have anti-mez, the dwarf forms, if you rack them up and even do just minimal amount of IO slotting, but then you're just stuck in dwarf form all the time, and that severely limits your all the utility you can bring to the table and the attacks that you can bring to the table. So, not really that good. Thing is, with human form, you can have everything. You get the ranged attacks, you get the melee attacks, you get the capability, you get the resist capability, which you don't get. And this is the ultimate Achilles heel, and it's the reason why I've got Clarion on auto. What you don't get is any anti-mez protection at all. And that means that all it takes is one minion with the mez to completely shut a Warshade down. So an archetype that is supposed to be a melee powerhouse or be a tank with controls can just be shut down by a single minion. Absolutely shut down. Now, to be fair, Paragon did do something about this. Paragon did admit what Cryptic would never admit, and that the mez shutdown was a problem. So they made it so that you can change into the dwarf forms at any time, which have anti-mez. Yeah, that wasn't really a solution. And the thing is, going back to, the dwarf form is only useful if you slot the dwarf form out, but the dwarf form has so few powers to slot out that you cannot put power, that you lose the slots to put in the other powers, and thus you decrease where you can put your bonuses and how you can basically buff your character up. Your character is not as flexible. So hitting melee defense lets me get in close and against enemies that that I can avoid or don't saturate defense debuffs. I can last longer against them, maybe get the defense debuffer down first, and then focus on the rest of the enemies so I can now pretty much shrug their attacks off. So that's why, and one of the things you'll hear me say over and over again is there was a guide, and it was one of the reasons why I started with the song I started with. there was a guy calling by a player who the MF guide to Warshades. The player was full of it. They didn't know what they were talking about. Yeah, shot fired. The dominant Warshade guide that was used on the live servers on Paragon and Cryptic was absolutely useless. It didn't actually tell you anything. It didn't tell you how to slot. It didn't tell you how to handle enemies. It didn't give you a strategy on how to actually play the character. And that's kind of one of the issues that I've always had with that particular guide. And yes, newer powers, new enhancement sets have actually opened up ways to play the character differently. And for example, here's a build that has this is a human form build, and this goes with experimental injection. On this one, I took speed of sound for the teleport, I took adrenal booster for the extra damage, I took experimental injection to host, I think, the preventative medicine proc. No, I put the preventative medicine proc in stick and return. What did I put next? Oh, I put the chance to heal, so I can heal off of a teammate. And let's see, did I do anything else really different in here? It doesn't look like it did, because everything else looks about the same. And let's see if I've got anything that looks a little more normal. Alright, here's R8 LP. I forget what LP stands for. Okay. Orbiting death, tactics, acrobatics. Okay. This one also reaches melee. And this one I took combat jumping, super jump, and acrobatics. Now, this was something you would actually see very often on the live server. In order to mitigate knockback, you had to take acrobatics. And Warshades, which would routinely be in melee range, needed acrobatics to take any kind of knock effect. So, not sure why I called it LP. LP for leaping. That took me way too long. All right, so and this is an example of what what the R8 build would look like if you were taking a traditional travel power set. And not much has changed. Now again, these builds are only possible using sudden acceleration. You can only really crank the character to the maximum using new enhancement sets that were implemented to address prop rather than, remaking the entire game, which is a tall order in and of itself. Sudden acceleration was an acceptable compromise to deal with the mitigation issues needed for knockback powers, which in some cases make Warshades a viable archetype to play. I can, in fact, solo a +2 X8 ITF. I might die a few times, but I can, in fact, do it. And that's something that really wasn't possible before. It is now. Alright, we're approaching an hour, so that's all I got on this. And hopefully that this look at Warshades will be useful to